Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a really fascinating journey through a very specific esoteric lecture all about human consciousness. If you've ever stopped and wondered where your thoughts actually come from, or how we might categorize our own mind beyond just the physical realm, well, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's dive in.
Okay, let's look at our roadmap. We're going to start with the three physical brains, explore the nature of the mind, and then break down the sensual, intermediate, and interior minds before wrapping up with the physical mirror practice.
All right, Section 1, Los Tres Cerebros Físicos, or the physical hardware of the human machine. According to this framework, we really have to understand our physical foundation before we can even begin to tackle the nature of our thoughts.
And this brilliantly illustrates how the lecture categorizes the human nervous system into three primary physical control centers. Now, we aren't talking about the intellect here. No, we are talking about the spinal brain, the central medulla, or sympathetic system, and the vagus, or parasympathetic nerve. Together, these three run the whole autonomous machinery of our body.
So these physical brains handle immediate action and reaction. The speaker uses a really grounded anecdote here. Say someone drops a marker near you, and you instinctively reach out and grab it before you even consciously realize what you're doing. Well, that reaction happens entirely outside of the actual mind. It's a process handled completely by the rapid-fire communication of these physical brains.
Moving right along to Section 2, La Naturaleza de la Mente, the metaphysics of thought. Here is where we leave pure biology behind and step into the abstract, fourth-dimensional realm of thought.
I want to ask you a direct question pulled straight from the source material. If I ask you to picture your very first childhood bicycle, take a second, think about it. Where exactly are you seeing it? Obviously, it's not physically in the room with you, and there certainly isn't a tiny little bicycle inside the tissues of your skull. So where does that image actually, spatially exist?
Well, the lecture answers this by defining the mind as a tetradimensional astral vehicle, one that is completely separate from the physical brain. It acts sort of like a transparent mirror, reflecting both external reality through our senses and internal imagery, like that bicycle. The physical brain processes the data, sure, but the mind is the mirror where the image is actually projected.
But there's a fundamental problem here. An untamed mind is continuously agitated by what the speaker calls the ego. Think of it like a crystal-clear lake reflecting the sun perfectly. If you chuck a rock into it, the water ripples, right? And the reflection gets completely distorted. That relentless stream of thoughts hits the mirror of our mind, exhausting our intellectual energy and actually reducing our capacity to learn or retain information. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this striking paradox. The eloquent way to think is not to think. To get our mind back to being that calm lake, we have to silence the constant chatter of the ego. True receptivity, as the source argues, requires us to stop reacting impulsively so we can absorb reality exactly as it is. Which brings us to Section 3, La Mente Sensual, trapped by the five senses. The lecture classifies the mind into three specific types, starting with this foundational layer. The sensual mind relies exclusively on data provided by our five physical senses, strictly limiting reality only to what is tangible. The speaker actually uses a metaphor here, linking this to the biblical materialists, the Sadducees. It's the perfect mind for, say, knowing a horse has four legs. But, according to this philosophy, it's totally useless for spiritual or esoteric inquiry, simply because it cannot process what it can't physically touch. Next up is Section 4, La Mente Intermedia, the danger of dogma. And the lecture argues that this second category is, by far, the most dangerous.
So, while the sensual mind relies strictly on physical evidence, the intermediate mind attempts to explain the metaphysical without having any direct experience of it at all. The speaker notes that this specific mind creates dangerous dogmas and fanaticism because it essentially forces blind belief in concepts without demanding any actual internal proof.
The source gives some very concrete examples of how this intermediate mind causes harm when it blindly attempts to control or preach about things it hasn't actually experienced. It cites people who claim to heal chakras with quartz without actually understanding astral dimensions, or even massive historical atrocities like the Inquisition, where people were tortured in the name of unproven beliefs. That, they argue, is the true danger of theory without direct, lived experience.
And that leads us to Section 5. La Mente Interior, the power of direct experience. According to this framework, this is the ultimate goal for human consciousness.
So the crucial point is this: the interior mind feeds exclusively on direct internal experience and an awakened consciousness.
It completely bypasses both the tangible limits of the sensual mind and the blind faith of the intermediate mind. It allows the practitioner to perceive realities way beyond physical dogmas by relying purely on personal, spiritual, and reflective experience.
Finally, Section 6, La Práctica del Espejo, calming the astral mirror. To move from the basic sensual mind to the illuminated interior mind, the source details a highly specific, step-by-step physical practice.
Let's see how this builds. The setup for this technique is really fascinating. First, you place a mirror under a clear glass of water. Second, you add 2 drops of liquid mercury into the water. Third, you relax your physical body completely and stare at the mercury. And fourth, you simply let passing thoughts drift by without identifying with them in any way whatsoever. The whole concept here is to passively observe your thoughts passing by like train cars, right? You watch them, but you don't climb aboard any of them. The lecture claims that through this extreme relaxation and observation, the mind eventually tires itself out and becomes truly receptive. And at that point, the practitioner can begin to perceive geometric light, vital energy, and ultimately achieve deep internal perception.
To close out this explainer, I want to leave you with a question that perfectly summarizes the essence of this source material. If the eloquent way to think is not to think, are you currently controlling your thoughts, or are they controlling you? It's a wildly provocative idea, and I hope it leaves you reflecting on the nature of your own mental taxonomy. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey, and I'll see you next time.